Now, on to the good news. Today's speaker, as you may have guessed, if you hadn't looked at the schedule, maybe by the food that's in the back. We don't have donuts this morning, but we have chocolate, Hershey chocolate. And we're fortunate to have Lynn here talking to us about the Hershey story. Lynn worked at Hershey for many years. Not too many, because she's not old enough to have many out there. But she has a very good familiarization with Hershey. She's worked in many different aspects of Hershey, and she will tell us about some of that. But she's worked in various Hershey operations. So it's not just one, not just the Hershey store. And she's been worked there when she was in college, in high school, and after that, she worked for them in different roles also, before we were fortunate enough to snare her away and have her become our director of technology, or whatever your fancy title is. Lynn keeps us abreast of all the latest technology. And for those of you who don't, she makes the streaming service work in church. For those of you that, if you can't come on a particular Sunday or an event, tune into the streaming or to the Zooming. So Lynn really keeps this organization, our church, going on a communications basis so that all the staff, the ministers, can communicate their message to us. So without further ado, Lynn.
Thank you, Ted.
I'm going to kill the audio.
I just hit the record button, so.
This.
I would like to do one more introduction while we've got up here. Joining us via Zoom is Pam Whitenack, who is not seen at the moment, but she was a Hershey archivist at the Hershey Community Archives for over 30 some years, I believe. So I asked her to join us. Since I've been here for 7 years now, I'm starting to get a little rusty, and figured I'd bring in the big guns to answer questions if you stump me or if I give you some misinformation. So welcome, Pam. Feel free to jump in if I say something wrong, or if we need to elaborate, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We're game for anything, wherever you want to go. So let's get started. I absolutely love Milton's parents. They were polar opposites of each other. His mother was Fanny Hershey, and she was a Swiss German descendant, spoke Pennsylvania Dutch, was a Mennonite tradition, and Milton grew up in that tradition. She was also very frugal and very strict to, keeping the family budget on top of things. Her husband, Henry Hershey, who's pictured up here as well, he was the exact opposite of her. He was an inventor, entrepreneur, dreamer. He had all kinds of big schemes, looking for the next get-rich-quick scheme. But the challenge with Henry was that he kind of lacked the motivation and business know-how to implement and get all his business stuff working. So he went bankrupt several times, unfortunately, and didn't really have any successful skills in life to do that. So somehow these two different people got together and had Milton. He was born September 13th, 1857. He was born in Derry, Pennsylvania, which is now Hershey, Pennsylvania. He had a younger sister who died at the age of 6. And the family was moved around quite a lot. Because of Henry's bankruptcy and money challenges, he would go off and disappear for long periods of times. And Fanny would take Milton, and they would move to different family members' homes. Milton worked on the family farm, but because of the transition of different houses and things like that. He didn't have a formal education. He kind of ended his education in 3rd grade. Very hodgepodgey. So at that point, Milton started apprenticing for a local printer who published a German English newspaper. And he really didn't like that kind of work. He thought it was very boring. So his aunt helped arrange for the 14-year-old Milton to apprentice at a confectioner's shop in Philadelphia. So that's where he started learning about chocolate. And like his father, he became an entrepreneur. He wanted to start his own business. And like his father, he failed on the first few times. He's tried in New York City, Philadelphia, no luck. He went to Denver to actually learn about making caramels with fresh milk. Excuse me, I'm jumping ahead. Then he went to New Orleans and Chicago looking for different opportunities, and he failed there as well. So he finally came back to Pennsylvania, and he doesn't have a lot of money and things. He begs his family for help, and he starts building the Lancaster Caramel Company, and he finally has success in Lancaster. Soon he had over 1,400 people working for him and shipped caramels all over the US and Europe. So very successful at that time. And then in 1893, he went to Chicago's World Fair, and there he saw chocolate making machinery for the first time. And he thought it was so interesting, he went and bought it. And why was he so intrigued with it at the time? Chocolate was very expensive. It had to be imported from Swiss, Belgium, or South America. So it was for the elite class. There was no mass production available at the time for chocolate.
Lynn, I'll just come in and just straighten that a little bit. So,
Please.
The chocolate that's widely available in the United States is what we would call semi-sweet or dark chocolate. But milk chocolate was the luxury item, and it's made at the it's introduced about 1877 by the company that becomes Nestle, and that's the luxury product. That's something that's very inaccessible and very expensive. But semi-sweet or dark chocolate, as we would call it, is widely available and very popular. And that's one of the reasons why Milton Hershey is so intrigued by this chocolate making machinery, because in his caramel line, and he's got a product line of well over 100 different kinds of caramels, all different kinds of flavors and shapes and sizes, but he also has chocolate flavored and chocolate coated caramels with this semi-sweet chocolate that are very, very popular. That's all I want to say.
Please jump in more, please. Once he saw this, he decided to risk, I kind of jumping off Pam, sorry. One thing that once Milton bought the machinery and brought it back to Lancaster, he started covering some of his caramels in chocolate first. And he started noticing that a lot of people were licking the caramels off, the chocolate off the caramels, and sometimes would even throw away the caramel. And he thought this was fascinating, and kind of came to the conclusion that you can see here on the screen. Caramels were a fad, chocolate was a permanent thing. So he decided to sell his Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million, which is roughly $30 million today. And even though he knew nothing about making milk chocolate, but he knew there was a demand. So his first decision was, okay, where can I build a factory? So he thought about the different ingredients he would need to make chocolate. Does anyone know the 3 main ingredients used in chocolate, or want to guess?
Cocoa, milk, and
Yeah, you guys all got it. Milk, cocoa, and sugar. And he knew in central PA, where he grew up, there were dairy farms. So he decided to build his factory in Derry, Pennsylvania, to be near all the cows. He also knew that there was train tracks available that he could then ship his chocolate, but also bring in the sugar and the cocoa. So he built a factory in Hershey, PA. He was actually working on a recipe. Maybe Pam knows more about this than I do. He kept tweaking the recipe until he opened the factory. He kept playing with it up through that. So he's working on building his factory. He's working on making recipes, but what about all the workers? It's in the middle of farmland. There are no people other than the people on the farms. So there were some local towns in the area, Elizabethtown, Hummelstown, Harrisburg, but they couldn't walk to Derry, PA at the time, and horse-drawn carriages weren't as available. So Milton decided to build a trolley for them to bring them to Hershey. But still, there wasn't enough people, even with, bringing some of them in. So he decided to build a town. And he knew that there was a lot of other companies that built company towns, similar to Bourneville, England, which is the home of Cadbury chocolates. But he knew that all of these companies would make very cheap cookie cutter houses that didn't last long, cheap materials, all look the same. They would charge their employees rent rather than letting them own and take pride in their, homes and things. And Milton Hershey did not think this was ethical or a good way of doing it. He wanted to give his employees power and give them respect in their lives. So he actually made sure that all the houses looked different from each other. They weren't, identical. He also wanted his employees to own their own homes, and ended up creating services in the town like banks, department stores, laundry, things that were separated from the company, and it wasn't just this big cycle for the company itself. He also wanted that his employees got educated. He built schools for their children. He built a junior college, encouraged more education for his workers, and was always wanting his employees to come to him and say, how can we improve the system of the factory and make it better? He also wanted to make sure that his employees had some culture and recreation. Milton had traveled a lot in the world, and knew that most of his employees would never leave Central PA because at the time you couldn't really fly. It was expensive to go on boats. So he wanted to bring culture to them, which is why he built what is kind of what we think of Hershey Park today. But at the time, it was more a ballroom. There was a swimming pool. He brought in a zoo with elephants and different things so that people could see some culture that they would never get in Central PA. So I skipped over one important person in Milton's life, Catherine or Kitty Hershey. She is a Irish Catholic girl who had a family that worked with chocolate as well at the A.B. Works Confectionery in Jamestown, New York. She met Milton Hershey in 1897. They were married 2 years later in 1898, 1898, not 1989. Milton was 42 when they got married, and Kitty was 27. So yeah, at the time it was not such a drastic age difference that we think of today. But Kitty had a very strange relationship with Milton's mother, Fanny. Can you imagine if you're a Mennonite mom and your in-law is now a Catholic? Very different traditions and ways of doing it. Fanny also thought that Kitty was a little vain and kind of thrift, like spent a lot and, kind of more worldly. Meanwhile, Milton's father, Henry, absolutely adored Kitty. Kitty also loved to entertain and travel and things. And actually, Milton and Kitty had tickets to go on the Titanic and changed their plans last minute because of Kitty's health. Kitty had a lot of health problems. So they were always traveling the world trying to find a cure or help ease her discomfort. And she ended up dying on March 25th, 1915. And she was almost paralyzed by the point she died. Doctors at the time, no one could determine how she died or what was the diagnosis of her illness. But doctors today have gone back and looked at her symptoms, and they have determined that it's a disease very similar to MS called locomotor ataxia. And because of her health, Milton and Kitty never ended up having children. And this was a huge disappointment to both of them. So they ended up founding a school, the Hershey Industrial School, in 1909 to include children. It was originally open for 12 orphan boys, and they wanted to be sure that these boys learned a trade as well as an education. So the boys would work on farm and then go to school, whether it be, the trade be farm, carpentry, or something. They wanted to make sure that they could go out in the world and make a living as well. So the Hershey company's thriving. Milton and Kitty are enjoying the industrial school and helping these boys. And along comes the Great Depression. Hershey actually was pretty successful. There was no financial dip in the income of the profits of the company compared to other businesses at the time, because people, Hershey chocolate bars were only 5 cents. So if anybody got some spare, change, that they would splurge on something sweet, a special treat. I kind of think that we saw that happen in the pandemic as well, right? You just want to go to your comfort food when you're depressed and sad. So that happened to the Great Depression as well. But Milton could tell with all the people in the Central PA area that there was a lot of struggling families, and he wanted to make sure that families had work that they could provide, and he could help all of the employees in the area. So he ended up building a lot of different buildings in the Hershey area. Here are 3 examples: the Hershey Theater, the Hershey Hotel, and the Hershey Arena, which are still around and making profits today. And some of the requirements that he wanted with these buildings was to, again, instill that cultural kind of history in it. So if you look inside, if you've never been to the Hershey Hotel, you can see that it looks like an Italian villa. He wanted people to be able to go in the lobby and go, this is what Italy might look like, since you will never be able to go yourself. And he did that in the theater with the mosaic ceiling as well. So he was very much wanting to expand the worldview of his employees. So Milton Hershey died on October 11th, 1945, at the age of 88. and he just died of old age. He continued to work up till the day he died. And the Hershey Industrial School actually was his biggest comfort in his final days, helping all the children. And he never remarried once Kitty died in 1915. And he would continue to, she was absolutely loved roses. And so he would always have roses in their bedroom to honor her. So that's a little summary, very in a nutshell, of Milton Hershey. But what is his legacy today? The Hershey Industrial School was renamed to the Milton Hershey School. It is still functioning today. It's now open to both boys and girls. It's open to any race, ethnicity, anything like that. It used to be just white boys. And it's opened up to more than just orphans. Yes, there are orphans there, but it's also expanded to children with disadvantaged homes, which could be your family is making less than $15,000 a year, drug abuse in the home, the child is abused mentally, physically, emotionally. But a lot of times it's combinations of all of these things happening in the home. Some of the stories I've heard from children are just heartbreaking. So they start locally with students in the Hershey area, but then they open it up to whatever the need is. They actually have students up to 48 states represented at the school. And it's completely funded by the Hershey Trust, which we'll get into next. There are no outside donations to the school. It is fully just Milton's profit. When Milton died, he left his fortune to the school. The school also currently serves over 2,000 students from pre-K to 12th grade. They're actually now in Hershey building some daycare facilities to help with the preschool age as well, more for the community. And children live in group homes of 8 to 12 kids per home, and they are grouped together by age and gender. For example, middle school boys, elementary school girls, and there's a married couple that are paid to be their house parents to help make sure they get, all their meals, help with homework, and take them to extracurriculars. And the requirement from the school is that they still need to learn a trade before they graduate. So that they could still do carpentry or things like that, but now they have pre-nursing, pre-med, communications, business, all those kind of trade skills. And they also earn scholarship money at the school, and most of them will pretty much have a free college education if they get scholarships at their colleges. So most all of them go to a college. There's a good portion that go to the military, and there's some that still go straight to the workforce. But this is a photo of the campus. If you've never seen it, Catherine Hall, which is the middle school. And this is the complex of the elementary school. Down here, the high school, sports, and then Founders Hall is the original place. So Wes Fosnot, if you know him at Westminster, he actually attended Milton Hershey School. What is the Hershey Company up to today? It's the largest manufacturer of chocolate confectionery in the US. With 19,000 employees. It's got a lot of brands. There's 7 manufacturing facilities in Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and US. And a lot of people go, whoa, why are we making chocolate in Mexico and Canada? And all the chocolate in those facilities are actually being made for those countries. So Mexico, a lot of them will be made for people in South America or Latin American South. China makes chocolate for China. So you will see sometimes on packagings here that things are from Mexico, but most everything in the US is made in one of the Hershey factories. We still have 4 Hershey factories in Hershey. We have Hershey's West Hershey factory, West Plant, which was built in 1992. It's the world's most modern chocolate factory. It was renovated in 2013, and it can make up to 80 million kisses a day. And at maximum, at full capacity, it makes 160 million kisses a day. So if you line all those kisses up in a row, it goes from New York City to Shanghai, China. We also have a Reese's factory still running in Hershey. If you drive through Hershey, a lot of times you will smell roasting peanuts from the Reese's factory. They are currently breaking ground in Hershey for a new factory right next to the Reese's factory that will pretty much just do the base chocolate mixture, not actually finish the Hershey products, but will, then go, okay, here's all the chocolate, now add the almonds or whatever it might be to do that. So that will be being built soon. There's also a Hershey Technical Center that does kind of combinations. What could we do new and see what works? And there's a applied center for research for medical and pharmaceutical research. So the thing you might notice on here that is missing is the original 19 East factory. And if you lived in Pennsylvania 10 years ago, you probably heard about it closing. So I figured I'd dive into that just briefly in case you were wondering about that. The 19 East factory was this beautiful historic building. Milton Hershey's, built it in the 1903, and it ran for over 100 years, but it kept being added to. It was not one big plan out. Lots of different levels, lots of stairs. There was a lot of codes that were not up to par. There was really no windows, and it was a lot of outdated machinery, and they couldn't update it. They pretty much would have to completely demolish the factory and rebuild it. And so the only reason keeping it up and running was nostalgia. And Milton was always one that was going, okay, this is a terrible idea. Let's throw it away, start something new from scratch. So he probably would have closed this factory down a lot earlier than we actually did. We closed it in 2013, and most of the employees that worked at the 90s factory actually went to the West Plant because they did the renovation to the West Plant that same year. And a good portion also did retirement packages. So this is what the complex of the original factory looked like in 2009. And this kind of is what has been removed to now make what it currently is today. The 19th factory right here is now the corporate headquarters for the Hershey Company. And it is a lot more modern spaces, fields to exercise all kinds of cool things. So it's still a working building. It's still the corporate headquarters. It just is not a running factory anymore. So that's the Hershey Company. I gave you guys a handout to kind of oversee all the different Hershey operations that Milton left behind. So you can review this if you want. So kind of the historical layout is the Hershey Trust. So when Milton died, he created a Hershey Trust in 1905, well, before he died in 1905. But it oversees all the nonprofits that Milton Hershey created. And I kind of think of it like Westminster's endowment grant fund. It kind of just manages all the different philanthropies Milton did. So he did 3 different nonprofits. One went to the Milton Hershey School. So when Milton died, you know, all of his income went to the Hershey.
Well, Lynn,
Yes.
just to clarify a little bit.
Please.
So the Milton Hershey School Trust actually was, the school is established through a deed of trust, and he and his wife signed that in 1909, and the boys start coming in 1910. When his wife dies in 1915, Milton ponders for a little bit, but then in 1918, he basically will enact his will, whereby he transfers all of his wealth. And at that time, his wealth consisted of the Hershey Chocolate Company, which was a privately held company that he owned virtually all of it, all the land that he's accumulated, all the support businesses, the Hershey Electric Company and the water company and the sewage company, and everything was Hershey. All those businesses that he created or had created to run the town, that's also still owned by him. So all of that wealth gets transferred into the school's trust fund. He very wisely remains as chair of the trust board, so he still has total control over all of his wealth. But basically, he's sort of preempted those kinds of things that would have happened when he would have died in 1945, so that all that transfer of wealth takes place almost 30 years before he dies.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, he was a visionary on so many ways. So yes, we also found it was the MS Foundation, which does a lot more of the cultural and educational facilities, and then the testimonial. So one of the things that was created by Milton was the Hershey Entertainment and Resorts company that oversees all the entertainment facilities in Hershey. So if you go to Hershey today and you go to the Hershey Stadium for a concert, or you go see a musical at the Hershey Theater, any of those kind of things are part of the Hershey Entertainment and Resorts facility. Hershey Park, any of those, and that is 100% owned by the Hershey Trust. And so if you do any of those activities, it goes straight to the school and the trust and all of that. So there's that. And then the Hershey Foundation is the Hershey Story, which is the museum on Chocolate Avenue. If you do that, it tells about the life and legacy of Milton Hershey. The Hershey Theater, which is no longer run by the Hershey Foundation. H&R is the one that programs, you know, what's coming to the theater, but it's still, the building is part of the foundation. The Hershey Gardens was actually in honor of Kitty Hershey, and it's known for its rose gardens. So if you like rose gardens, head up to Hershey for that. And then the Hershey Community Archives, which is what Pam spent most of her career at, is down in the basement of the Hershey Story as well. And they store and archive all of the documents about Hershey. And then the last thing that Milton Hershey did as part of his wealth was to do the testimonial trust, which then donated money to the Dairy Township School District. So that is the school district I went to, and the Hershey company, it still does a lot of support for that township as well. So that is a brief, very brief overview of Milton Hershey's life and all of his legacies and things like that. So I'm sure there's a bunch of questions you guys have. So feel free to do that. I'll let Pam probably answer most of them because she's a lot more wise than I am. Yes, Dave.
Did he build any churches for the town?
Did he build any churches? I
No.
don't believe so.
He
No.
did not. There were there were two congregations that were already established that were part of the community before Milton Hershey arrives in 1903. The first was the Jerry Presbyterian Church, which is the oldest church in the community, that was established in 1724. And then also there is the Spring Creek Church of the Brethren, which also predates the establishment of Hershey. But the rest of our congregations come once a community is established.
He also did, Derry Presbyterian Churches has a session house from the 1700s.
1732. Yeah.
1732 that Milton Hershey did enclosed in glass. So that is still now able to be seen because of that, which is really cool. But that's, yeah.
So, and I will say that for Milton Hershey, he never joined any specific church. He would kind of pop into sort of each of the congregations at some point during the year. And in 1935, in sort of the depths of the Depression, there were 5 congregations, 4 Protestant and 1 Catholic congregation here in Hershey, and he gifted each of them with $20,000 to help them during a period where their financial resources were being really strained. And his wife made significant, she only lives until 1915, but when they're, particularly when they're living in Lancaster, she is making significant contributions to the Catholic hospital and the Catholic church there.
Yes, Dan.
The park. When was it built? Was he alive when it was built? Was it his idea?
Hershey Park, if you
Yes.
didn't check. So,
Yes. So one of the really remarkable things about Milton Hershey and this vision for this model industrial town is that as he is, he's acquiring all this land. By the time they break ground for the factory in March of 1903, he's accumulated about 1,200 acres of land. And the museum or the archives has a very large scale map that shows these initial purchases of land that he'll go on and acquire land throughout his life. But areas for, residential, for the business district, for the park and the factory are all laid out on this map, that 1904 map, which is, well over a year before the factory will begin operating. So the park was part and parcel of his vision for the town. It is dedicated in the summer of 1905 when the factory opens and begins operations.
But what we think of as Hershey Park today,
I think, the coasters, all that kind
yeah.
of stuff. But I think
it was not in Milton Hershey. I think only ever rode the Comet, if I remember correctly.
Well, there's a roller coaster that, and I don't know that he would have ridden it. Definitely not. The Comet comes in after his death. The first roller coaster goes in 1923. But the park is very quickly, it's life as just a little community park, with a bandstand and picnic tables. They start adding, rides and attractions before the park is but a few years old.
I saw some more hands. Yes.
Now, the Hershey Trust is run by a board of directors.
Mhm.
How are they selected?
Do you know, Pam?
Yes, the board itself makes selections. They go through a very intensive vetting process, not just in terms of their expertise for why but just, significant and serious conversations about, their commitment to youth and to, the appropriate management of these funds and, their values. But it is the board selects itself. The way Milton Hershey set it up upon his death, that the trust company owns itself.
The city utilities, as we think of it, electric company, sewage, etc., are those still owned by Hershey, or did they get given?
They were starting in the 1960s with the rapid development of new technologies. Hershey is getting, sort of priced out, can't afford to invest in all these new technologies. So throughout the 1960s, all those utilities are getting sold to regionals. So, and that's what the predecessor company to Hershey Entertainment Resorts was called Hershey Estates. And when it's established in 1927, and part of it is because Hershey Chocolate Company is going to become Hershey Chocolate Corporation, a publicly traded company. Milton Hershey needs to separate out all those non-chocolate businesses. And actually in the Hershey Estates charter, it makes reference to non-chocolate businesses. And so it's this very challenging company that is charged both with the maintenance and management of the town, but also the management of all these attractions and hotels that make Hershey a very attractive place to visit. So flash forward to the 1960s, all those town maintenance management businesses are losing money. In fact, they almost always lost money, but Milton Hershey didn't care about that. They get sold off, and then the company will focus on what it does really well and actually generates income, are those resorts and entertainments.
So how does Hershey's legacy as an individual with character compared to other titans of the time like Carnegie or Ford, or, you've got to assume it's much more positive, but was he viewed that reverently in the city of Hershey?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I would say more so, but you probably.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Well, I feel like every time I hear, Pam's heard a lot of oral histories in her career, so she probably heard more, but every time I talk to someone who knew Mr. Hershey, they just have glowing stories and memories of him. I haven't heard any really horrible comment about Mr. Hershey's life, but
yeah, when you look at people like Henry Ford or Andrew Carnegie, they were very focused on accumulating wealth. And then it's really only later in life that, they're sort of like, well, I guess I could do something good for others, but it's never at their expense. One of the really striking things I find about Milton Hershey is that way before he had any kind of wealth or success, he's just a young man struggling. And there's this great sort of autograph book in our next door neighbor town is Hummelstown. And in their historical society, there's this book that, someone was collecting, signatures. And so Milton Hershey was just a friend. And he inscribes this quote, which I can never remember all of it, but the message was, the value of money is the good that you can do with it. And, your value is the good that you can do for others. And this was way before he had any money. And then when he does actually accumulate money, that's his focus. What am I going to do? I have all this wealth. How can I make other people's lives better?
Yeah.
I've read that a good portion of the world's cocoa production comes from West African plantations where literally slavery is still practiced. And I wondered what Hershey Company's been doing about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's this, like, right around the equator, around the world is where cocoa is manufactured. You can't really go north or south. I don't know all the details of what the practices are now. I'll have to ask my dad for specific details. But I know they are working with governments and things to, pay their employees and things rather than slave labor. But yeah, I don't know.
And so cocoa is grown. Hershey never got involved during Milton Hershey's lifetime, or the companies since then never became involved in establishing plantations, like being a company-owned plantation or anything like that. Some other British companies like Cadbury, they don't do it today, but went down that path for a while. Today, Hershey gets the majority of its cocoa from Ghana and the Ivory Coast. And so Hershey does significant investment in everything from building systems to communicate best agricultural practices to help, because most cocoa is grown in Africa, at least, is grown on small farms. And so communicating best agricultural practices. In Ghana, they are investing heavily in helping the country to develop strong nutritional supplements for the children that are peanut based, so that they can be grown. The peanuts are grown in Ghana, and then actually the manufacturing plant for these nutritional supplements is all based in Ghana. So it is a really challenging dilemma that faces not just Hershey, but other chocolate manufacturers. And the major players in terms of chocolate manufacturing are all invested in trying to improve the situation. But as Lynn said, with politics, it can be really challenging.
Good questions.
The Milton Hershey School was in the news a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if I recall correctly, they weren't spending enough money. Is that true?
Do you remember the story?
Be often true. The school trust is huge. Depending on what the market's doing, it's anywhere between 16 and 19 billion dollars. So sometimes they're just generating more money. The newest initiative that the school is actively undertaking right now is, and the school, to make any changes in terms of the mission of the school, requires the permission of the Pennsylvania Orphans Court, because that oversees all trusts that are focused on children. And so the newest initiative is the Catherine Hershey School for Early Learning. This school has received permission to build, I think it's 6 basically daycares that will serve the poorest populations. And so daycare will be free, and it won't just be daycare, it will also be, because start at the infant level and go up to pre-kindergarten, but diapers and food, but and so all of that is at no cost to the parents. But in addition to the care of the child, the schools also will work with parents to help them develop job skills, to learn better financial planning, all of those steps, and to try and help families break out of that cycle of poverty. The first one will open this fall. It's based here in Hershey. It has spaces for 150 children, ranging from infant to the age when they would hit kindergarten. Then the next site will be in Harrisburg. They've located the site, and I think they're getting ready to break ground on that facility. And then there's going to be one in Elizabethtown, one in southern Lancaster County, and I think one closer to Lancaster City. So that's a really exciting initiative. With the goal of the school always is with their children is to help them, part of not just educate them, but help give them the skills so that they can, break that cycle of poverty that, when you're in it, it just, children grow up knowing nothing else. And so they just repeat what, their parents know.
So yes, the problem with the school is always, we have a lot more money and we could be helping more, but how can we build the system to make it? So yes. Fiona, did I see your hand?
I just was interested in your connection with Hershey when you were a student and
So my history, my dad, when he graduated college, wanted to work for the Hershey company. He had heard Milton Hershey's story and he liked the ethical giving back to the community model. And so he was like, I want to go work for that company. And when he graduated, it took him a couple years before the Hershey company actually hired him. He did a lot of interviews to actually get there, and became a sales guy. And when my parents were pregnant with me, they actually, my dad got a job in Hershey, PA. So they moved out of New Jersey and came to Hershey. So I was born and raised in Hershey. My dad worked his way up through the Hershey system. When he retired in 2013, he was the VP of Corporate Social Responsibility. He had worked his way up and done, he was in charge of the packaging department. He's one we can blame for switching the original chocolate wrapper to what it is now. My mom and I didn't talk to him for like 6 months. So that's where I grew up, obviously, grew up, with season passes to the Hershey Park and things like that. When I was in high school, I started working for Chocolate World, which in 1972, up till 1972, they were giving tours of the factory to the public. So you could go and see them make chocolate. But at that point, there were so many people coming, it was not safe and practical. So they built Chocolate World to give you kind of a tour ride experience. And so I started working there in high school and through college. And loved it. It was a great summer job. I learned a lot working with tourists. So after I graduated college, it was during the recession. I kept trying to get a full-time job. No one was hiring. So I ended up going and working at the Hershey Story Museum on Chocolate Avenue and got to work with Pam at the museum. So I worked there for 3.5 years or so, until I got a full-time job, and it was great. I got to talk about Milton Hershey every day. So that was great. During that time, I started my own business, doing film and digital media stuff. And one of my customers was actually the Hershey company. I became a contractor for them and would do some film projects and things for them. I did an internship in college with the Hershey company as well. And then a couple of years before I moved here, I became a part-time events coordinator employee at Hershey Entertainment Resorts. Basically I would work security, kind of like the extra wand people as you walked in things, because it was, if you're a HENR employee, you get an automatic free pass to Hershey Park for the year. So I was like, I only have to work once every quarter, I can pick what event I want to work, and I get a free park pass. So how can you turn this down? Yes, that's my history with the company. And it's a great place. My brother started working at Chocolate World when he was 15 years old. He is still working there today as a brand. He's worked his way up and is a brand manager. And a bunch of the chocolates back there, I specifically got because they're ones he manages now. So he was like, you better have Rolo, you better have Mounds, you better have Almond Joy. But yeah, that's my history with Hershey. Other questions or?
Very good. And thank you.